Arctic sea ice melt impacts people on a local and worldwide scale. The Arctic is warming over twice as fast as other places on Earth. These effects are felt disproportionately in Alaska due to its proximity to the Arctic Circle. However, the International Arctic Research Center, or IARC, the leading institution on Arctic climate change, is hosted in Alaska, specifically here on UAF's Chotieta campus. IARC focuses on education about and adaptation to the rapidly changing Arctic climate. I've lived in Alaska my entire life and have seen some of the impacts of climate change firsthand. I've also taken great care to research the impacts of ice melt on the indigenous community through studies and authors that directly interview indigenous peoples. I'll overview what sea ice is and why it's melting at such a high rate, the effect sea ice melt currently has on people living in the Arctic, and the international implications of sea ice melt on weather patterns and conflicts between countries. Before addressing the impacts of sea ice, let's review what it is and why it's melting at such a high rate. Sea ice melt creates an amplifying feedback loop that perpetuates warming oceans. Different from glaciers, which form partially on land, sea ice is ice that only forms and melts in the ocean. An article by Ronald Kwok and Norbert Untersteiner from Physics Today synopsized that sea ice falls into two main categories: multi-year ice, ice which does not melt and persists year-round, and first-year ice, ice that freezes and melts throughout the year. Multi-year ice is twice as effective as a reflective as first-year ice, meaning less sunlight warms the ocean if it contacts multi-year ice first. They noted that multi-year ice has been declining at a rate of 11% per decade and is replaced by first-year ice. Since first-year ice is less reflective and absorbs more sunlight, the increased presence of first-year ice is warming multi-year ice, therefore melting more of it. This is a positive or amplifying feedback loop, defined by a biology dictionary as where an end result perpetuates the original action, causing the cycle to reoccur. Sea ice melt is already impacting communities in the Arctic. Currently, indigenous people feel the brunt of sea ice melt, which poses a threat to their food security. Researchers at UAF partnered with the World Wildlife Fund and conducted an interview with indigenous hunter Bobby Schaffer in the village of Kotzebue, Alaska. Schaffer told interviewers that more seals are drowning in large storms since there is less ice to protect them, and that the seals that do end up getting hunted have less blubber due to them having to travel further to eat and having less ice to rest on throughout the day. Human hunters are also having to travel further and commonly cannot make the journey when the ice is too thin. A study conducted by Huntington and others of the global implications of warming Arctic oceans found that about 4 million people live in the Arctic, and of those people, about 10% are indigenous peoples who depend on the ocean for commercial and traditional uses. According to Maija Lukin's personal experience, an Inupiat co-author of the Huntington study, some families can no longer teach their children to travel on ice in the winter. The Huntington study also referenced that while changing environments do not always coincide with a food security threat, in this case, only a loss in food security has been observed. The impacts of polar ice melt extend just beyond indigenous peoples and living in the Arctic regions. Polar ice melt has international implications as Arctic resources emerge and polar winds shift. The Huntington study predicted that international debate and conflicts may rise over issues concerning who has control over Arctic waters as more resources become available. According to researcher Thomas Au and others with the Canadian US Law Journal, currently polar ice melt has made natural resources, including oil, natural gases, and rare earth minerals, more accessible in, quote, historically large amounts, end quote. Additionally, they found that different countries have already begun setting up infrastructure to collect these resources and are already running into conflicts about regulations. For example, the US and Canada have vastly different regulations to offshore drilling, and this is causing tensions between the two countries in the rush for resources. Extreme weather events are also predicted to rise in all places of the world. This is due to issues with the polar vortex as the poles are warming. The National Weather Service defines the polar vortex as, quote, a large area of low pressure and cold air surrounding the Earth's poles, end quote. It's named a vortex because of the circular flow of air that keeps the cold air around the poles. Essentially, the polar vortex regulates the cold air that travels south during the winter. World Wildlife Fund author Lauren Hancock notes, the warming ocean temperatures disrupts ocean circulation and the polar vortex. Therefore, stronger storms and wildlife habitat disruption will perpetuate as polar ice continues to melt. Overall, Sea ice melt has wide-reaching implications similar to other effects of global warming. As multi-year ice melts, it opens up more dark patches in the ocean, causing more melt in a repeating loop. Currently, the melt is affecting indigenous peoples in Arctic communities by threatening their food security, and has the potential to incite global conflicts as Arctic resources become more accessible. Melting sea ice has the potential to impact people all over the world, not just Arctic regions. Educating yourself on the impacts and opportunities of sea ice melt can expand your perspectives on climate change. Thank you.